Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elia Malm at Highland Park, New Jersey, Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Sheikh Day School, Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky in New York City, Anshe Chesed. We are starting the Torah again. Let's just pause and think about that. That is such an amazing statement because it's an amazing Parsha. We're back to regular Parshas. We're back to the weekly Parsha, Bereishit, the beginning. This is where it all begins. Bereishit bara Elohim, et hashamayim ve'et haaretz.
What was the Aretz?
Yeah. I we didn't talk about this, but I have to share this with you. One of the themes that I was thinking about over Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the holidays is you got to live inside the text. So I had this meditative vision, okay, that I was literally inside the text. Literally, like I shrunk myself down and I saw myself next to the words, okay? That the words themselves were big monuments, big, huge blocks. Like, the love sculpture and in the Israel Museum, it's Ava. Okay, that's quite a large sculpture. And but it's human size. Imagine that scaled up, large, and you're looking at, and so what I'm saying is that the text is monumental, and if we just shrink ourselves down and look at the text, in its monumental structure, it's breathtaking, it's overwhelming.
Didn't Kafka do this already?
Did he? Okay, good.
Metamorphosis.
Did he do?
He became a bug, not a
the large bit says it all. It says this is where it's all starting. The Torah begins with a bet. There's so many midrashim, Bereishit bara, nice alliteration. And we're all inside this text because we're all little, small creatures.
As long as we're inside the text, one of the things that strikes me is how do we actually visualize this opening chapter?
Yeah, good point.
It's very difficult to really figure out what it's actually trying to say. And it makes one wonder.
So what do you see?
Well, what I'm struck by is that apparently in the beginning, there's water and darkness.
Yeah.
And somehow that becomes differentiated. But it makes me wonder why God does certain things. So what does it mean when he separates the light from the dark, and the day from the night? I mean, once you have light, is the expectation that there might not be any dark anymore?
Of course it's dark. Of course it's dark because Lachoshech Kara Laila.
Have you ever been in a cave where there's no light? Have you ever had that experience?
That's my everyday experience when I'm in bed.
But but first of all, one thing that you're saying, Barry, which we want to put an emphasis on this, is that the problem that will sort of emerge from philosophy in the Middle Ages, creation ex nihilo. The Bible, the best thing you can say is the Bible doesn't address that question. If you want to argue that there's creation ex nihilo, creation after complete non-existence, suddenly there is existence from ayin to yesh, as the medievals will say, from non-being to being. The best you can say is the Bible doesn't address it, but the more obvious thing you can say is that's totally not what the Bible thinks. The Bible thinks there's a primordial darkness and a primordial ocean, and God moves through the primordial darkness and turns it into light. And God hovers, Choshech al pnei adam, mirachefet al pnei hamayim, the God is fluttering above the great ocean, and turns it into something meaningful. So the Bible, like, how do you visualize it? It was the world was complete wild and waste. It was unformed. It was raw material, and a scary raw material, dark, deep. And then what God does in Genesis 1, and this is like the style of Genesis 1, is God is the God who imposes order thanks to God's will. God just says, let there be light. And
so maybe that's the experience. I mean, the emotional reaction to the first verses of Genesis is a kind of fear, awe. I mean, again, I've been inside caves, dark caves, where you can't see in front of you. It's total darkness. And in total darkness, you can't differentiate between anything. You can't see water, and you are likely, if you make the wrong step and there's a pool of water in front of you and it's deep, you're going to drown. So there's a primordial fear here, and the moment that the story breaks is with God's word, Yehi Or. That's really it. That's, stop the presses there. That's I don't want to say that's the whole Torah, but Yehi Or.
That's the headline.
That's the
That to
Yehi.
bring you back to your journalism career,
Ye-
Jeremy.
The headline.
Yehi is the headline. Let it be. Let it be. Let it be. Let there be.
Are
Let there
you gonna
be.
sing? Are you gonna sing Paul McCartney?
I'm not going to sing it, but I just think that it is the force that unleashes things in the universe is let there be, and it's a word, and it's a word that comes out of divine will. And so what you said, Jeremy, that this chapter is all about order from chaos, but the order from chaos, the ordering force, is God's desire to, God doesn't have to make anything.
So what do you make of the Ruach Elohim?
Yeah.
So we have this deep blackness, and the Spirit of God, or the wind of God, is just above it. So is that independent of God, or is it a part of God?
It's all that black scene. It's one black painting in your imagination.
So God is of the world, but not of the world?
All there, and takes one little pierce of light to break everything. It's I don't want to make too much out of the connection between the Big Bang Theory and this, but I know there's a book by Danny Matt that makes the connection, and there's something to be said for everything emerging from one moment. This moment where everything collapses on itself, and it's just this infinitesimally small, little seed, primordial seed that is 1 to the negative who knows how much. And that's what everything comes from. And all the energy that's released into the universe, that's still in the process of being cooled even now, right? And that we're all, extensions of that. Now they, of course, the Torah doesn't know from this kind of cosmology, but it knows of a different cosmology, that everything comes into existence because God wants it to be, and God wants a certain order, and that the darkness that's there is something that God has to kind of shape and separate and move for. So we move through, all these stages of creation, and on the theme of energy, or on the theme of imposing, not only is God saying let there be, but when you come to day 5 and day 6 and day 7, you have a new concept really introduced into the whole creation story, which is that God creates, and then God blesses, or God vayivarech otam Elohim. Chapter 1, verse 22, where God creates the animals, vayivarech otam Elohim lemor. He blesses them and says, "Pru urvu, be fruitful and multiply, umil'u et hamayim bayamim va'of yirev ba'aretz." And let the fill the sea, the water in the seas, and let the birds spread over the land. But the idea that God blesses and vayivarech, and I'm not exactly sure I understand what that word means, even though it's a word that is so important in the Bible, it's important in Judaism, it's important in our lives, and how would you define vayivarech?
So what I would say is that this is an argument against theism, the idea of God as a creator who then removes himself from the world. Because I think the force of vayivarech is that even after creation, God is still involved with God's creatures, all of them. in the land, in the sea, and in the air.
Okay.
And life is not going to continue without God. And maybe one way to understand the descent of the generations is that over those first 10 generations, the people removed themselves from God. God pledged he would not remove himself, but they removed themselves. And hence the world had to start over again by bringing it back to the water.
There's I believe that this, the phrase is so elegant that I think that it's probably medieval Hebrew and not actually the Baal Shem Tov, but it might be the Baal Shem Tov. There's a perception of the koach hapoel b'nifal, that there's a you can feel the presence of the actor in what is created, and that's gets to Barry's description, which I think is quite true. A religious person, feels that sense that God is not only, or another Kabbalistic language, God is both misovev kol almin, making the world turn, umimale kol almin, filling the world up. Both of those things, I think, emerge out of this chapter. And the bracha part, if you ask me, like, what's the etymology of bracha or baruch, I think it's like related to the word berech, ni, that it is the awe-inspiring figure who inspires people to bend the knee. But obviously that's not the end of the meaning of the word, because God is the one who is baruch, and yet God is giving. Bracha would mean something like that power that makes you bend the knee and worship and be reverent towards the divine. I'm going to give you some of that. I'm going to give you some of the wonderfulness, and hope that you too will experience bracha.
Well, I heard a creative etymology of bracha, which is that I think if you take a shoot from a vine and that's lavrich.
That is to grab.
In a way that, a bracha is the transfer. So using that idea that there's something being transferred here, that the blessing that God gives, I almost want to say, I'd like to have a more sophisticated analogy, but this is the on switch. This is like I'm at the ceremonial start of the whole thing, the whole enterprise, and I'm pressing the button, and I'm giving it the force. I'm giving it a push to start. I'm starting life off, and by igniting life. It's the ignition of life that comes from divine will and divine desire, divine love. And what's so fascinating is that it applies to life, to the life of the animals. It applies to humans. And then, of course, in the seventh day, Vayevarech Elohim et Yom HaShvi'i, Vayikadesh Oto, which is chapter 2, verse 3. God blesses the seventh day and sanctifies it, Kivo Shabbat Mikol Malachto Asher Ba'alim Asot, because God ceased from his work on that day, of all the things that God does. And so this seventh day, it's like the time has a built-in rhythm. I read Vayevarech on the seventh day as in the same sense as it's the pressing of a button, it's the ignition switch that sets the rhythm. The rhythm of life is reproduction. You have a full life and you reproduce. That's the rhythm of life. The rhythm of time is time starts on day 1, comes to its cycle conclusion on day 7, and then starts again. And that's Vayevarech. That's my sermon.
Pretty good one.
Yasher Koach.
Yasher Koach. Okay. So having created the entire universe now, we come to chapter 2, verse 4, and we get a second iteration of this. So the first iteration of creation ends with the first part of chapter 2, verse 4. Ela todot hashamayim va'aretz bihi baram. This is the story of the heavens and the earth, bihi baram, as they were created. End of story. Now, why the story ends in the middle of a verse, I'll have to leave for another time. But then the next story starts. Biyom, and I love telling stories, and I have such memories, wonderful memories of the pagoda at Camp Ramah and the secret story spot. And the second rendition is more storytelling. although the first
You think that Eila Toldot Hashamayim V'Haaretz V'Hi Bar'am is the end of the first bit?
so the little
And that's a
research,
common
that's what all the translators
critical
did.
scholarship.
They put a fermata, a little pause in the middle of the verse, and they start from that place in the verse. They start a new paragraph.
Okay, I don't think that is impossible, but
Okay.
I would say that first of all, our describal traditions place a paragraph mark at the end of verse 3.
Sure.
Period, new paragraph. And the Eila something something formula, I think usually, I mean, I could look it up and I could be proven wrong, but I think the Eila formula means, and what's about to come is the new thing. So Eila toldot hashamayim ba'aretz b'hi baram would mean, and now here begins the story of heaven and earth.
I think the way that they prove this is by saying, well, the first verse 1:1 is hashamayim b'et ha'aretz, et hashamayim et ha'aretz, and here it's hashamayim ba'aretz. So we have a nice linkage with 4a to the beginning, to 1:1. Okay,
I could see that.
And then 4b starts with B'yomasat Adonai Elohim Eretz V'Shamayim, the inversion, and then we're focusing on land versus sky. So we are now going to be looking at the earth. V'chol siach hasadeh terem yeh v'aretz, and all of the vegetation of the field is not yet in the aretz, it's not yet in the earth. V'chol esev hasadeh terem yeh, no grass has sprouted yet. Ki lo himtir Adonai Elohim al haaretz, because God has not yet caused it to rain al haaretz. So our focus is on aretz, and so there is a shift going on. And this, again, I feel different. I feel emotionally different reading chapter 2, 4a on than I do feeling chapter 1. So I'm going to ask my therapists here, why do I feel so different?
Because it's a totally different scope. The one is, seen from the Hubble telescope, and the one is like a physics lesson, and you're learning the orderly, procession of one thing from another. And this next one is you're getting in there in the mud. Like, how did God make humanity in the first one? God said, let's create the human being in the divine image. Yeah. And Na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidmutenu, who the we is, let us make man in our image. Who the we is an interesting question still to be, you could work on that one later, but this one's totally different. Vayitzer Adonai Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adama. God forms the human, crafts the human, sculpts the human from the dust of the earth, vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim, and blows into his nostrils the breath of life, vayhi ha'adam lenefesh chaya, and the human being becomes a living creature. The first one is all order, divine fiat. God just says. This one is God's fingers in the dirt, and we are part of the dirt. And yet, vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim, God gives us this what do they call it? What the 911 guys do? The CPR. CPR gives us the CPR.
The defibrillator, right?
Yeah. And dirt comes to life.
This is pure storytelling, pure.
So
I just want to say
one thing to add here.
I want to just want to say it's like I in being animated as a storyteller, this is the script, right? Because you are being God, as you tell the story, you're saying this mysterious thing happened where a person turned from a clump of clay to an animated being by just a breath.
The original inspiration.
Yes.
You're my soul and my heart inspiration.
This story in chapter 2 presents the human being at the center, which is part of the reason why I think it resonates with you, Elliot.
Sure.
'Cause you've been known to like to be the center of attention.
Absolutely. Let's bring it on. Bring it
Yeah,
on.
but the other thing is that this curious image that God fashions the human being and then breathes into him means that the human being is both apart from God, but has part of God within. And that is very powerful. You have to feel good about that.
You got
I
it.
think.
Exactly. Quite true. Quite true. The Ramban on that line is so brilliant. I'm forgetting the exact Hebrew phrasing. Well, I'll look it up as long as I've got the wonders of the computer before my very eyes here. Ramban, give it to me in Hebrew, please. Um, 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 well, I'm losing the phrase.
As you're looking for, okay, go ahead. Vayipach be'apav, can't help but notice the beautiful poetry of that, Nishmat Chaim, and that your breath is the connecting thing, that, within the whole meditation world, we are focused on breathing. Breathing is the meditative exercise, par excellence. That's what you do when you meditate. You really, really focus on your breath.
You breathe.
And if you want to be very spiritual about it, you could say, I'm trying to connect to my first breath. I'm trying to connect to my last breath. I'm trying to connect with breath, and imagining with inhalation and exhalation, things going in and things going out. Beautiful light coming in and darkness going out, I suppose. Did you find it?
No, I didn't. But
What's
the basic idea is that whoever shares breath with another, if one person breathes into the lungs of another, it's from the deepest part of their self
Sure.
that they give that. So the divine has infused the human soul with something deep from within divinity, and so that breath, the Ramban, being a medieval guy, he thinks that's how you get a soul. That Adam got a soul thanks to the breath of the divine.
All right, pick your story. I will raise the topic that Barry mentioned in a pre-conversation, which was, isn't it odd that that God brings all of the animals to be named by Adam, and that God names Adam from Adamah, and it's not the height of creativity. You would think God would be a little more creative with his naming, like George or Irving.
That was my grandfather, Irving.
But God calls the first creature Adam because he was made from Adamah, as they say in Canada. Adam. So
it's this is a Kabbalistic little maneuver. Aleph stands for the Alufo Shel Olam. The Aleph stands for the chieftain of the world, the cosmic Aleph. And with the cosmic Aleph, then it's a human being. Without, it's just dumb. It's just a bag of blood. But the presence of the Aleph turns the bag of blood into a human being in the divine image.
Nice. Well, what did you mean by the question, Barry, when you asked the question?
Well, it just is kind of striking. We praise God as this creative force in the world, but I was saying before the show that after we get past chapter 1, God seems a little bit tentative, like he's not quite sure what he's doing. Right? He brings the animals for Adam to name, and yet he can't come up with a very good name for Adam himself.
Well, how about? I mean, I think it is fair to say that God is also kind of learning and dealing with mistakes. But how about, and I think this would generally be good characteristic of rabbinic Judaism, good characterization of the attitudes of rabbinic Judaism, he's inviting Adam to join the process, right? Okay, I'm going to call you Earthling, and let me see what you come up with. And you come up with, cheetah and walrus, and by the way,
I
Woolman,
am the walrus.
you are the Eggman, and maybe the supreme one is, Isha ki meish lukachazot etzem me'atzamayu basami bsari, flesh, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, and he call you woman because meish lukachazot. This one was taken from. I mean, it's not a feminist story here. We don't have to evaluate on those grounds right this second, but that's like a supreme act of naming too, because even the human being is engaged in the naming of human beings.
Well, is Adam simply replicating what God does? It's a simple. Adam, you are Adam because you are taken from Adama. You are Isha because you are taken from Ish.
And then why is Kayin?
Kaniti Ish.
Kaniti Ishat Adonai. This woman will also be part of it. She will name an individual child. I mean, Adam. First of all, there are parts of these, and if you look closely throughout this passage, and JPS actually, the JPS translation, which appears in our Eitz Chaim, Humashim, maybe most of our people, if they're in synagogue, are singing Eitz Chaim. Many times, I would say probably most times, Adam receives the definite article ha-Adam, and JPS will rigorously translate it as the human. And sometimes there's not ha-Adam, it's not the Adam, it's just Adam, and that seems like a personal name. So I would say most of the time in these chapters, Adam refers to a species, not a person's name. At one point it says, Vayikra, I think it's in chapter 5, I think. Vayikra et shmam Adam, and called their name Adam, which clearly means that both the male and the female are in the species human, not the name of the male human is Adam.
Interesting. Is there any particular verse or idea in the remainder of the Parsha, as we have just a couple of remaining minutes, that you might want to just gloss on? Anything that you want to think about? Anyone, do you want to give our listeners or loyal people?
Well, for me, the two of the three times that the word Tselem Elohim, image of God, will appear in the entire Bible is Genesis 1, Genesis 5, and Genesis 9. The next one will be next week. Mm-hmm. All before Abraham shows up. It's not about Jewish people, it's about human beings. Tselem Elohim is a characteristic of the human animal. And at a time where we have all too much, like the dynamics of Jews are special, we belong to the Jewish people, absolutely true. Universality, all human beings are part of a great human family, also absolutely true. I think this is a good reminder to readjust this away.
Barry, anything to leave us with for Bereishit, just off the top of your head, thinking of?
Oh, I guess, as I said earlier, this idea that very quickly God becomes disenchanted with his creation. Something has gone so seriously wrong that it can't even be stated outright what it might have been. Mm-hmm. But by the time we get to Noah, who is supposed to bring such great comfort, the world is on its last legs, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I was struck, it never occurred to me, not quite sure why, that the flood is an attempt to bring back the tohu vavohu as it is described. But where is God in this? At this point, God is not Ruach Elohim lo merachef et alamayim. The Spirit of God is not hovering above the water. The ark is on the water.
There's so many ways to read the text, and so many strategies for reading the text. I would suggest one strategy is read the questions. God asks a few very, very pointed questions in this parsha. First one being Ayeka, right? Where are you? And mi higid lacha, Ma Sita, what did you do? Who told you? And then, of course, moving to the chapter 4 with Cain and Abel. Where's your brother? Ma Sita, what did you do? Kol Dmei Achicha Tzoakim Elai Min Adama. The sound of your brother's blood is crying. So you can read questions in so many different ways. Questions, of course, as to elicit information, or mostly to elicit response. And this is a God who wants response from people asking questions. As teachers, you may have had the experience. We all have had the experience where you ask a question and you get complete silence.
Oh no.
Has that ever happened to you, where you stand in front of a group of people and you ask a question and there's that, 1 beat, 2 beat, 3 Mississippi, 4, and there's tremendous tension in that moment, before the answer. And what has to happen? Barry, you're dealing with this daily.
Well, I was thinking, the great tragedy is when it happens for an entire period. So one of the funny things is the teacher is supposed to be the adult, so supposedly they can wait out the student. But in real life, that doesn't always happen, where sometimes the teacher will break first and say something rather than wait for the silence to become unbearable.
But notice the word you use, it's break. It's
Yeah.
It's exactly that. It's the tension. There's too much tension.
I want to ask you, Elliot, a question. You described the tension-filled moments, and you said, one Mississippi. Is that what they say? Is that what they say in Canada?
We say about Mississippi because there's a Mississippi River in Ontario.
Oh, there is a Mississippi River? Because what's the town where Ramakant, Mississauga, right?
Not Mississauga. It's near Bracebridge or Utterson.
Mississauga is a place, right?
Mississauga is a place, but there's a Mississippi River. In fact, my glasses are still in the Mississippi River, because on a canoe trip when I was like 13 years old, I lost my glasses in the Mississippi River in Ontario. And that's where we're going to end this story.
Because Elliot has to go look for his glasses.
When I was 14 years old in the Mississippi River in Ontario, Canada. We want to thank our viewers and listeners. You're loyal to us, and we so appreciate that. You don't know how much it means to us. We have people literally who are so religious about this show, they can't do without it. And that really touches our hearts. We're so grateful and honored to be able to start the Torah off with you again for another year of great Parasha Talk. So looking forward to this. We want to say first, have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbat, and we'll see you next week on the next edition of Parasha Talk.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.